A lot of your ability to raise the size of your deals is not based on your customers, it's based on your mindset and how you approach the sales process. The more you narrow your focus on one single type of problem for one single customer, the more you are the perfect solution to a very specific problem, the more quickly you can scale, the more customers you get. And just getting founders to understand that somewhat counterintuitive approach is one of the biggest challenges of what I do when I work with them. That kind of combination of elements is what I think creates the structure that you just described that will make you much more likely to succeed selling to big customers who expect that from their partners and suppliers.
Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual. Now, today we're tackling a challenge that's all too common for business-to-business selling or B2B selling, which is the daunting task of securing deals with those large enterprise clients, those whales, those elephants. It's a world that's filled with long sales cycles, complex negotiations, and the pressure of pitching to massive organizations. And for many business owners, it can feel like an uphill battle, often leading to stress and uncertainty. So to shine a light on this critical issue, I'm thrilled to have Zoltan Vardy as our guest. Now, Zoltan isn't just an expert in the field. He's a seasoned veteran with a 30-year track record, including high-level roles at NBC Universal and ProSiebenSat1 Media, which are both multi-billion-dollar revenue companies. Now, he dedicates his time to mentoring startups, sharing the wisdom that he's gathered through his experiences. And so he's here on today's episode to talk about the launch code, which is the name for his proven blueprint for navigating the complex terrain of enterprise sales. And so whether you're struggling to break into the enterprise market, or perhaps your primary route for sales is through enterprise sales and you're looking to refine your approach, Zoltan's insights are going to be absolutely invaluable for you. So get ready to learn how to streamline your sales process, target the right clients, and ultimately how to make enterprise sales less stressful and more successful. So let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Zoltan.
Hey, Alexis, thanks very much. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's so good to have you here. And in fact, if we can start with a bit of that background, can you share your journey from NBC and ProSieben to becoming a mentor and a speaker, now guiding B2B tech startups and enterprise sales?
Sure, absolutely. Be happy to. So, I'm a startup mentor. I work with business-to-business tech founders who generally struggle with sales, are not comfortable with it, don't have necessary experience with it. And I help them to sell and market to enterprise clients, as you mentioned, by applying a blueprint that I created called the launch code. And it's actually built on all the principles and the tools and the techniques I've used to close over $2 billion worth of B2B deals over the course of my career. And as you mentioned, the C-suite at big media companies, but also as an entrepreneur and as an investor myself. And I think that it's precisely that combination of corporate sort of background and as well as entrepreneurial experience that makes my approach somewhat unique, because there is some sort of benefit to balancing that kind of very structured approach to selling that you get from large organizations with the dynamic execution focus that's needed for entrepreneurship. And in some ways, it also reflects my own personal journey to answer your question. I had basically built a career, 20-year career in corporate sort of sales and marketing and general management, and had risen the corporate ladder, so to speak, to ultimately become senior vice president of global sales for NBC Universal International. So one of the largest media companies in the world, where I oversaw $650 million business covering 30 different countries in the television business. And after about a couple of years in this role, I sort of came to the conclusion that I was a bit exhausted by all the environment of a corporate role, and I wanted to get back into something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And so it didn't take me long until I discovered this possibility of working with early stage founders. And one of the insights I got from a really early stage of my involvement is that I met with a lot of people who were extremely knowledgeable and passionate about the products they were developing. right? So they really believed in the technology. They really believed in the problem they were solving, but they lacked the mindset and the skills they needed to really be able to sell and market their product. In fact, some of them were quite uncomfortable with the idea of selling, right? It's like forcing somebody to buy something that you don't need. And this was really keeping them, back. And so what I started discovering is that they were, defaulting to sort of two types of approach to selling. One is what I call the I know a guy approach, which is very much, network-based sales. I know a guy here and, I'm sure he'll buy our product. And then there's kind of spray and pray approach, which is like, let's send out 1,000 emails and hope somebody responds. And so I noticed that they really didn't have the skill sets. So that's what I came up with, right? So I took all of this learning that I had and I created this kind of 3-pillar sales and marketing system that I called the Launch Code. And it's something that I've shared through personal mentoring programs, through my own on-demand video course, and some combination of the two. Now at this stage, having worked with over 200 founders in 26 countries across Europe, helping them to focus their offer message, to build a structured sales model, to execute based on clear guidelines and targets. And I think it's addressed a really fundamental need in the market, and I'm very pleased that I've been able to bring that knowledge to the fore.
That's amazing, and I think there you're alluding to the pillars of the Launch Code, which would be great to kind of briefly kind of cover those before, because I want to then dive into some of the common challenges, particularly that I've experienced myself with my own B2B businesses and also seen with other businesses. So just before I dive into some of that detail, take us through, like, at a high level, what's the Launch Code?
Yeah, so the ultimate objective of the Launch Code is to help founders build predictable revenues, right? That's the essence of business. After all, that's how you can invest in people and products. That's how you can build a business. That's how you can raise funding. So it's a really critical need. And I do that by helping them to sell and market to enterprise customers. And the 3 pillars I've created are there to address very specific problems. And let me give you an example. So what is a typical situation that you'll find a lot of founders in, right? They go to an event and, people will come up to them and say, so tell me, what do you do? Right? Typical question. And I don't know if you've had this experience, Alexis. I certainly have, where I'll ask this question and then I'm overcome with a 5-minute monologue of gobbledygook and buzzwords and technologies with no end in sight. And you sort of leave with your, scratching your head and say, okay, what does this company do? Well, that's the first pillar of the Launch Code. It's about focusing your offer message so prospects understand what you're selling. And so it really starts with the value proposition, goes through the product offering, and then the messaging and the tools that you convey. So that's kind of the first situation. The second pillar is built around the concept of structure, right? So it's about, not spraying and praying. It's about not, randomly talking to people that you happen to know. It's about creating a very, very clear idea of who your ideal customer is, and then, following a very structured approach to reaching those potential customers through a combination of outbound, so direct selling, inbound, when they're looking for you and reaching you, and partnerships when you're using the credibility and the reach of third parties to reach their ideal customers. And so the outcome here is really to become much more structured and hopefully be able to close a higher percentage of your deals. An example of a company I worked with out of Slovenia, actually, a development company, they were really struggling with identifying their ICP, their ideal customer. And just by going through this process, we were able to raise their conversion rate from 5% to 40%. Just by identifying the right type of customers they should be speaking to. And the third and final pillar is really about execution, right? The best laid plans are pointless if they aren't brought to life. And so here it's how do you create a very clear set of goals, objectives? How do you manage your performance, track your performance against clear KPIs or key performance indicators? Also, you can make better decisions based not on gut feeling, but on data. And then using that to reach your revenue goals, and hopefully finally building a team that takes the founders out of that day-to-day grind of selling and puts them in a more strategic position and helps them hire the right type of people to actually deliver the sales on an ongoing basis. That, in a nutshell, focus, structure, and execute is what the Launch Code is all about.
Nice. And I love that. And I love how much focus there is on getting clear on who your ideal customer is and what you're doing for them. Because I think that's something that I've certainly struggled with over the years, and I think it's partly because there's this weird dynamic where I think that sometimes there's an assumption at the very beginning of the business that that should be what you do. Like, you get really clear on your niche before you even start, and then what your proposition is before you even start, and then you build it and so on. And whilst
if only life were that easy.
Well, exactly. It's like that's ideal. That would be amazing if we could do it that way. But my experience and working with other clients has been that actually you kind of have to start a bit wide and a bit scattergun to work out where there seems to be the most interest. I remember with my first startup business that probably took a year or two before we went, actually, we've got these like just a few big enterprise clients in our case, like Cisco and Autodesk and some others, where we said like they seem to be happy spending thousands of pounds when we've got other clients who seem to like be frustrated spending hundreds of pounds. What's the difference? And when we dove in, we were able to understand not only the type of customer, enterprise, etc., but actually it wasn't just that. It was like how they were using it, what problems they were looking to solve. And so we were able to then pivot the whole business around that. And I think, but that's a hard thing to do. That's a hard thing to do the longer that you're in it, because you kind of feel like you're one thing and then changing that is hard. So I want to dive into some of the common challenges that I think businesses face when doing this. And I'll ask you for others. But if I throw one of the first ones at you, which is, as you say, like you want to be clear on what's the proposition that you've got and who's that for. And particularly if we're going to go down enterprise sales, because there's lots of benefits of doing that, you want that clear. And yet, when you mentioned like talking to someone at the event, I remember with my other software business, I remember I'd speak to 100 business leaders and only one or two of them are the enterprise ones. And so if I'd got my pitch perfect for the really big enterprises, I'd have had 98 really frustrating conversations, and maybe I'd have gone to the bathroom in frustration and missed the other two that were with enterprises. So how do you manage that? How do you balance that? Or how do you tackle the challenge that I think a lot of business owners will have, which is, I don't want to alienate people. I get that I need to make it fit. Like, how do you bring that together?
Well, look, I think some of the most fundamental questions you have to answer in the beginning of finding your focus have nothing to do with ultimately whether you're selling to enterprises or selling to mid-market. Right. I think they are much more fundamental to how are you articulating a very clear problem for which you have an obvious solution, right? And that has nothing to do with whether you're selling to a company that's got 100,000 employees or 5. You've got to start with that. And I think that in itself is where a lot of companies go astray, is especially, I'd be honest with you, in the last kind of 12 months, where it seems like AI is a solution to everything. It's like, the latest tool to do this more efficiently and to increase your effectiveness by 1.2%. But it's like, hey, let's get down to the basics. Like, what problem are you solving for who, and why are you better than the competition? And I think, the best laid, tool is irrelevant if you're sending it to the wrong person and the wrong, and that you're sending an irrelevant message. So job number one is focus your offer message. And I'll give you a very specific example. So I worked with a company, a SaaS startup out of Poland that had a solution that enables industrial manufacturers to audit the effectiveness of their production processes, right? Pretty common situation. And when I started working with them, it was very clear that they had a very interesting solution, but they were trying to sell that solution to so many different type of customers, to different industries, to different type of markets, to different, right? It was like they were trying to be everything to everybody. And I told them, I said, and this is one of my favorite sayings, is if you're everything to everybody, then you're nothing to nobody. You've got to be very clear on one specific type of customers. And so we worked together to narrow their focus to auto manufacturers, and very specifically in the German market, that were specifically inclined to look for those incremental, tiny improvements in effectiveness, right? So there's a bit of a mentality, there's a bit of a clear industrial focus. And what happened is as we started focusing their message to that particular customer, a couple of things happened. First of all, their potential customer recognized themselves in their communication, right? It's like when I'm sure you get this all the time. You're like, get this email, like, what the hell does this have to do with me? It's like, completely irrelevant. How different it is when you get an email. It's like, hey, if you're a production director at a A-level German parts manufacturer, you probably have this problem, right? And then you're like, oh, well, that's interesting. That sounds like me. Let me read on, right? And then you're kind of focusing that whole process of getting people to realize that the problem they have, and then positioning yourself as a solution to that problem. And so we were able to do that, and they suddenly started closing significant number of deals with larger companies because they were speaking to a very specific problem. And I think the lesson that I took away from this is that, there's this natural human instinct to try to spread yourself as broad as possible, because then you have the biggest chance of reaching people, right? And ironically, the exact opposite is true. Like the more you narrow your focus on one single type of problem for one single customer, the more you are the perfect solution to a very specific problem, the more quickly you can scale, the more customers you get. And just getting founders to understand that somewhat counterintuitive approach is one of the biggest challenges of what I do when I work with them.
Really like that. And I particularly like the way that you put that around the that natural feeling for lots of people of, oh well, if I reach out more widely and I don't want to turn people off, therefore I'll get more opportunities to get sales and relationships and all these sorts of things. And of course, as you say, unfortunately the reverse is true.
It really is. And you know what? It's funny. I mean, you can obviously talk about this in the context of third parties, but I'll tell you about my business. Look, when I started out, very blue chip, big corporate background. I used to be CEO of a 1,000-person company. I would consider myself a pretty good manager. My background is in sales, but I kind of graduated to general management. So I had a bunch of business skills that I thought would be relevant for people who are starting their businesses. So at the beginning, I started talking to people about, well, let me help you build your business. But, frankly, that's a very difficult thing to understand. What does that mean in practice, right? And then, I could be relevant for people who are, starting a small business. I could be somebody relevant for somebody in the manufacturing business. I could be somebody relevant for somebody in the professional services business or startups. So, there's a lot of different types of customers that I could be offering my services to. And over time, what I realized is that ultimately the type of companies that are most acutely interested in my particular approach are startup companies that are innovative, open, want to scale quickly, want to go global, have a global mindset. Like just the whole mentality of those people was very different than sort of the family-owned manufacturing company focused on, delivering a product to a very specific audience. So that was like one of the ways I focused. And then I realized, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to be a good manager, but I'll tell you what, one thing I'm really good at is how do you sell to business customers? Like that's the significant value I add. And so I narrowed my focus to, I will help you sell and market your product or service to business customers. And the moment that I started focusing my own offer and saying, if you're a startup founder with a set of characteristics, early stage, but looking to scale, if you want to generate predictable revenues, and if you sell a business service to enterprise customers, I'm your guy, right? Nice. And just that level of focus, which took time, by the way, it didn't happen overnight, completely changed the arc of my business, and is, I think, a really good example of how you just apply the same principles to so many different other situations that are similar to mine.
Yeah, and I think that point around it took time, and often it's hard, I think is really important, because like in your situation, you might say that it must be times where you think, you know what, sometimes it is hard selling to startups. They haven't got big budgets. They they really would like to do everything themselves, and so as a result, it's quite as hard to get a high value ongoing sale there.
Yep.
Whereas, as you would teach through your own program, like selling to enterprise, actually, the enterprises would value how to sell to enterprises as well. Yep. So therefore, there's a really big opportunity there to create these ongoing retainer contracts.
But the pain is not as great. The pain is not as great. And that's really fundamental, right? So it's not just enough for you to identify a problem. You have to identify a problem that is agitating enough for the particular customer that they need to solve it, right? And look, I say this having worked for 20 years in big companies, flying business class and first class. So just as a reflection of their approach to costs, right? Like, at the end of the day, who cares? It's a rounding error. It's for them, an incremental growth of 1% in sales is almost irrelevant, right? But for a startup, being able to demonstrate your ability to help them grow 50, 100, 200% in the space of 12 months, I mean, that's a game changer, right? And so I think that's where it's a really different approach. Again, just reflecting on my own journey as an entrepreneur, and again, very much I think relevant to anybody selling a service among your audience, is it's not just enough to have the type of customer. They've got to have a problem that is acute enough where they want to take action, right? And that I think is a fundamental difference.
Yeah, and I think your clarity on where the value is and where the opportunity is amazing. I think that what I see a lot, and I've fallen into it as well, is the grass is always greener kind of attitude. Sure. Where if you're dealing with smaller customers, you think, you know what, like take SaaS, software businesses as an example. I've been my software businesses generally have operated mid-market, and as a result, typical average customer value per year is somewhere between the kind of 1,000 to 10,000 kind of dollars, pounds, whatever kind of range. And yet I'll meet owners of software businesses that have been only going, 12 months or something, and they're already at 7 figures revenue.
Yeah.
You go, oh, wow, how have you done that? Like, how many customers have you got? And the answer is like 1 or 2.
Right.
You go, oh, that's so frustrating. Like, you've got these enterprise customers and that's amazing. And I wish I had that kind of revenue. And so, of course, it's easy to then go, oh, the grass is greener, because how much easily they can get to that. And as long as they can keep those customers happy, it's like you build on top. But on the flip side, the reverse is true, right? They'll be looking at my business and go, oh, I wish I didn't have the customer density risk of, if I lose one of these customers, then this. And also they'll look at lead time cycle and sales cycle and say, oh, it takes me like a year to land the next client, whereas he's able to pick them up in 30 days. And it's, I think often we're all victim to that. We all think like, oh yeah, that looks good. I even see it, people outside the SaaS industry going, oh, I wish I had a software business. And that's because they don't think about data security incidents and stuff like that. So,
well, look, like with most things in life, right? Balance is what really leads to success, right? So I think that, as much as I talk about selling to enterprises, and it's the point of my spear, so to speak, what I talk about is not just, how to sell to enterprises, like how do you become successful as a business to business sales, function. And I think, having that balance of customers, and it's something I talk about a lot, is that, when you're, one of the first things you have to understand when you're approaching enterprise customers is you've got to approach the right ones, right? There are certain characteristics that you need to have in place, or that will likely increase the likelihood of your target customers being open to your solution. So a typical, characteristic is, I talk about elephants and deer, right? I think even in your introduction, you talked about elephants as enterprise customers. Well, look, I say that they're, if you kind of broadly approach this from 3 perspectives, they're like the rabbits, the elephant, the deer, and the elephant, right? The rabbits are like the small, nimble customers, or that will move quickly, but frankly, it's hard to, have a long-term meal with just one rabbit, right? On the other end are the elephants, who are the large, lumbering, low, slow-moving, usually market leaders who don't have a huge incentive to change. But, if you can, hunt for an elephant, that's quite a big catch. The ideal customers, in my view, in the enterprise sector or upper mid-market enterprise sector, are the deer, right? These are typically the challengers in their particular category, right? They're the ones that have an incentive to try out new things, to try out new innovations, to get that much better, because they're constantly trying to overcome the elephants. And every single segment will have that group of deer that are quite big, and represent a significant part of your, could represent a significant portion of your business, but are certainly open and nimble enough to make decisions, relatively quickly. The second quality I talk to my customers about, and if I just think about, a typical, customer, say a technology solution provider out of the UK that I work with in the warehousing logistics space, we talked about, okay, so target deer. Second, focus on companies that are private, not publicly owned. Why? Because publicly owned companies have quarterly, reports to deliver, numbers to deliver. So they're not going to make huge bets on unknown companies. If you're a private company, you have more leeway. Try to sell to headquarters rather than subsidiaries, because the decision-making authority sits with headquarters normally. Look for startup-friendly signals. Do they have a corporate accelerator? Do they have a corporate venture capital arm? Do they have relevant leadership roles? Do they have somebody called the head of innovation in their organization, right? These are all signs that this company is open to the prospect of working with early stage companies. And so, if I could define the perfect corporate target, I'd say their challenger position, privately held, with decision making authority in the headquarters, and with startup friendly signals.
Yeah, I love that, because I think I've definitely seen, as you say, like the rabbits, the deers, the elephants. I've definitely seen those deals on the elephant side where it ends up so frustrating because it takes so long, but also you can get to quite late stages in the process, and suddenly you're inundated with like 1,000 question information security questionnaire, or some very high expectations around some of the things that you might have in place. And those are things that for my businesses, we had to put them in place as a result, and it took a long time, and that's helped for subsequent software businesses because it's been quicker to put that in. But I remember in the early days, we just had to say no, and that was frustrating. I remember one particular client or potential client was Visa, and I remember them being really interested and going through all those hoops, and then them starting to go down the security bit. And I remember them saying to us, like, "Oh, just so you know, we've been told that our security requirements are higher than that of the NSA, which is like the American like security agency, right?"
Yeah.
And so I remember it was at that point where I finally like had this moment of realization where I'm just like, maybe they're not right for being a client of ours then.
Yeah.
Like, right, because up to that point, we've just been like, oh my God, it's Visa. Like, do it. Like, whatever we have to do, let's do it. And
look, obviously, the glow of the brand is a huge attraction for company, right? I mean, it gives you instant credibility. But I think one of the things I talk to my clients a lot about is setting expectations, right? I mean, I think you have to fundamentally, and I speak about this from experience in the sense that I have been a buyer on the corporate side, and I've also sold to corporations, right? So I kind of both as an early stage company in my early stage business that I built and sold. You have to understand that the fundamental motivator of a corporation is certainty, right? So that's why you have scenario planning. That's why you have meetings to discuss what you're going to discuss in the meeting. That's why you have slow decision making, right? Nobody gets ever fired for making a decision too early. There's just a mindset that sits with them that you have to understand. On the other end is, of course, entrepreneurs and startups who are driven by speed, right? Speed to market, beating the competition, very little internal politics, centralized decision making, right? So you kind of have these two completely different views of the world coming together and clashing. And other than just saying, okay, well, that's what I'm getting myself into, frankly, there's not much you can do about it, right? I mean, you can do some of the things that I just described in terms of qualifying the clients, and you kind of reduce some of that risk, but it's just the way of life. It's like, it's like complaining about gravity. It's just, if you drop a pen out of your hand, it's going to fall on the floor. You just got to live with it, right? And so I think that's something that you just have to get into the process of the right mindset, is that these are going to be slow. It's going to take a while. But, the nice thing is if you've got a couple of these conversations underway, and you're balancing that with a bunch of other conversations with other companies that are maybe, again, in that sort of challenger position, or even, smaller companies, you're not putting all your eggs in that one basket. And I think that combination, as I talked about, that balance of your portfolio is going to be critical to building a long-term sustainable business.
Yeah, that's nice. I think one of the other challenges that I see is that once you start going through that process, and as you say, you like go, okay, it's going to take a while, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to get a few enterprises in the pipeline, have those conversations. One of the other challenges I've then seen is the product requirements and the expectation of customization. So of course you get down that route where it's like, oh, well, yeah, actually we really need it to integrate with this system that we've developed internally, or it needs to include our branding colors, or it needs to do this or that. And of course, for lots of businesses, not just software businesses, doing that takes a lot of time to do it, but also it creates, in the software world, we call it technical debt. It creates this problem of, at some point when you try and copy it for another client, there's then stuff you've got to pull out, or if you then do an update later, you've now got to update multiple instances because they're all slightly different. And that can be a bit of a friction point, I think, for a lot of business owners, is how do you get that balance right between, essentially, in the SaaS world, one of the benefits of SaaS is that you've got this scale where you're essentially able to sell the same product to lots of people and then update it, and that's all great. But of course, that's not the case if you end up with 100 customers that have all got different instances and you can't update all of them. So how do you get that balance right?
I think you have to divide it in two, right? There's a certain portion of your company life where you're going to have to suffer through this stuff, right? Because in fact, in some ways, you're looking at it as your customers paying for your development, right? I mean, your product development, right? So if you're going through that process and you're saying you can make with reasonable assumptions that what they're asking for is something that other customers in that space will likely need as well, then you obviously are looking at this as something that needs to be done, whether they need it or not. Eventually, it'll have to be done, and here's an opportunity to do it, and somebody's at least paying the bill. Assuming, of course, that you've got a commercial agreement with this customer in place. And so I think you need to make some smart decisions there. And I don't think there's a perfect solution, or there's no empirically perfect solution. It's just, common sense. at some stage you will reach a portion of or at some stage you will reach a point in your development where you're actually better off just saying no, right? Like, look, this is what we can do. This is what we do really well. And we're not in a position to offer that as an additional requirement, right? And of course, there's always that risk of losing them. But, at the end of the day, that's how you scale, right? So until you're to the point where you're constantly having to adjust your product to meet a specific customer's needs, you're maintaining your unscalability, right? The minute that you say, this is our solution, this is the best possible combination of features and benefits that we put together, and we're now selling this as a ready-made product, that's when you can start really scaling your business. And so you have to divide that process, I think, into two parts. I'm chairman of a company called Entavo, which is a market leader in the loyalty technology space. So they basically have created an engine that helps power really significant loyalty programs for retailers and for fashion brands around the world. Companies like Tommy Hilfiger, companies like BMW, KFC in the UK, and the like. And I've seen the development of that company over the last 6, 8, 7 years, where at the beginning they were making all sorts of adjustments to their product to match the needs of specific customers. And now they've reached a stage where they have been able to really demonstrate that their solution, not perfect, because what solution is ever perfect, is close enough where they can sell it as a ready-made product. And that's what's enabled the company to 3x the revenues in the last 18 months, just by being able to maintain that commitment to their core product.
Nice. Yeah, I think I like that split, and I feel like for a lot of these areas, a lot of these challenges, it's like, yeah, that's kind of the problem with it, but it's worth it. And actually, just to pick up on that, like, what does that, when this goes well, when a business does a good job of making that pitch work to enterprises and reaching out to the right people, what does that look like in terms of volumes and numbers? Because one of the things that I think is hard if you've not done it before, or if you kind of feel like you've played at it a bit, is getting a sense for what does good look like over what period, for what size team should we expect to have, how many enterprise sales in the pipeline, and so on. Because in my experience, particularly because it varies, like on some businesses we've actively gone for enterprise, some it's been more by accident, and when it's by accident, it's like one happens to come along every few months or so, and like then becomes a customer and you go, oh wow, okay. And it's almost weird, you almost have to look at your stats and go, right, you can take out this certain amount because they're a bit of a one-off anomaly. It's hard to know, like, what does that look like in businesses that you've worked with where it's gone well? How does that play out?
Well, I think it's like with anything, there's some linear growth, and then hopefully there's a tipping point. So, I think as a business grows and it becomes more credible, and it gains credibility through existing deals, and you know how it is. I mean, corporations are sheep in many ways, right? If they see the necessary logos on your presentation deck and they say, okay, well, if these guys signed off, then it must not be bad. You got to get to that stage. I've seen companies that I've worked with have, 1, 2 enterprise deals a year. And, I've worked with companies now that have 10, 15. I don't think, because I do focus on companies that are sort of post-seed, pre-series A. So that's kind of my sweet spot in terms of their development. So they're scaling, but they haven't found product market fit yet. I can't speak to companies that are doing, 50, 100, 200 enterprise deals a year. That's beyond the scope of what I operate on. But I think, for that particular segment, I think the idea of closing 5 to 15 deals a year at enterprise level is a reasonable range. And we're not living in a very great environment for these deals right now, right? There's a lot of delays and budget cuts and pushbacks, and I'm sure you've come across this in other contexts as well, right? Right now there's a certain level of fear in the market still about what's going on in the economy. So as a result, I think the volume of deals has dropped in the last sort of 18 months. But, this is also very cyclical. At some stage, something's going to happen in the world, and all of a sudden people are going to forget about the, pending recession, which has been pending for the last, 2 years, and then things are going to take off again. But bottom line is, I think you need to measure your success by the stage at which you're in. And I think most importantly, at this day and age, you have to make sure that you have just enough resources to service just enough enterprise customers. So this concept of let's hire a bunch of people and then the business will come, that's very 2021. Now it's all about profitability and making sure that you're putting in just as much effort to deliver just enough result, and rather than overkill on the other side.
Yeah, fair enough. And do you have a view on deal size? Because something that I've seen is that, and if I think about an advisor that I had many years ago, where they, when I share with them, oh, we've got this big client that's started working with us, whether it's 3M or Sony or Britvic or Pepsi or whatever, and they'd say, well, turn that into a 7-figure client. This is the thinking that you should have.
Yeah.
And personally, candidly, I've always struggled with that, particularly
Mhm.
because the nature of generally my software businesses, as I say, deal size typically up to the kind of 10,000 kind of level, then thinking, okay, what would this look like 7 figures? And so I've kind of suffered with that limiting thinking. I also
Mhm.
know that there is, the principle of this kind of crossing the chasm piece around actually you need to be charging a certain amount to even make all of this sales
Yeah.
effort and lag time worthwhile. And I've heard numbers like 50,000 as kind of a minimum for the kind of deal size that we're talking about. Do you have a view on when business owners are thinking about this, what they should be thinking in terms of their model, both in terms of how much that they should be expecting to charge, and also how should they then be thinking about the value offering and what they're going to do to make them feel comfortable charging those kind of amounts?
So obviously, it's very difficult to talk about very broad generalizations because especially I operate in the European market, and an enterprise deal in the Czech Republic is very different than an enterprise deal in the UK, right? It's just a sheer different size of the market. What I can tell you is, as I sort of a decent rule of thumb, I'd say that enterprise starts at sort of between 30 and 50,000 euros, let's say, in a year, as a starting point. I think then you kind of jump into the 100 and 150,000 euro deal annual deal value range as kind of a next level. And then after that, it's also obviously a function of the industry, but it can be 3, 4, 500,000 euros. The 7-figure deals feel to me more like US type of numbers. I'd be hard pressed to find early stage companies closing $1 million deals in Europe. Maybe a later series, B and beyond, that could be realistic. One insight, though, I would have on this in terms of the value that you're selling, and I've experienced this now twice. I mentioned earlier Ontavo, this loyalty technology platform that I'm an early investor in and also chairman of currently. I'll be honest with you, back in 2017, 18, they were getting annual deal sizes of 20, 30, 35,000 euros. And there was a point at which it was like, we either grow quickly and scale this thing, or this is going to end up being a lifestyle business. And effectively, all we did was simply double the prices on the exact same product. And an amazing thing happened. We started getting bigger customers who were willing to pay twice as much for the exact same product. And suddenly the $30,000 deals or euro deals were now 60,000 euro deals, and so on, right? So a lot of this is also a bit of mindset and also a bit of targeting, right? So they were targeting certain customers who were only prepared to pay 25, 30, but they shifted a little bit higher into higher range customers, and all of a sudden they had bigger budgets and they were willing to take bigger risk. And I don't think that's everybody can do that, but a lot of your ability to raise the size of your deals is not based on your customers, it's based on your mindset and how you approach the sales process.
Yeah, love that. I completely agree with that. I've picked a few various
by the way,
challenges.
sorry, just as an end to that story, now they're doing deals average size of 150,000 euros, right? So again, it's that's grown to that side. But and I would say the product has also evolved since then. But I'm just saying that's how much the scaling could be, can change just through your own strategy.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because when you said, when we doubled it, it did make me think cool. And so when are you going to double it again?
Yeah.
So that process has happened. That's awesome. I love those, and I've picked a few various challenges that I've either hit myself on numerous occasions, or that others have hit. Are there any other challenges that you'd say that businesses that are trying to make B2B enterprise selling work, that are critical, that I haven't already picked on, that you'd like to kind of tackle?
Well, I think there's a couple of typical situations that you might find yourself in that I'd reflect on. So one is, you're selling a product or a service that falls into the nice to have category rather than the need to have category. And I think it's really important that you understand that, the amount of effort that an enterprise will put into negotiating an agreement is quite significant, right? For all the reasons that you just described in terms of decision making and technology and security. So whatever you're selling has got to have meaning right? It's got to have a meaningful, lasting impact, and it's got to have a bottom line focus, right? And look, I've sat in enough boardrooms over the course of my career, evaluating investment opportunities, and we can talk about all sorts of really high level expectations in terms of sustainability and the ESG and a lot of stuff that's important. But at the end of the day, decision makers are driven by the bottom line. Sorry, that's just the reality. That's what their bonus is paid on. Is it making a profit or not? So if you can't demonstrate that your particular solution is going to either help them generate more revenues or save costs, you're going to have a very, very difficult time selling into enterprises. That's just the one thing. So make sure whatever problem you solve, it matters, right? That would be the first thing. The second is a question of credibility, right? So, and especially this goes a little bit towards the kind of the startup environment. You've got this typical kind of Hollywood picture of the startup founder, with the raggedy jeans and the hoodie and the, Apple laptop under their arm with the Starbucks cup in their hands. That's all cool and that's all really interesting and romantic. But you know what? If you're stepping into a glass building on the 15th floor pitching to corporates, you better show up looking like somebody that they want to do business with. And that has a lot to do with the impression that you make, and it's also the quality of the materials you present. Do you sound and present like somebody that they can trust? And that's a very, very important part. And I think something that in this day and age is maybe downplayed a bit as being, old school. But I'll tell you what, I can tell you so many times I've been in boardrooms where people, they say your personal brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. Person left the room and they're like, this guy just doesn't seem really serious, right? I mean, it doesn't seem like somebody we want to do business with, right? So you got to make sure that you build your credibility. And by the way, that comes with things like, you worked at brand name companies, you've got, brand name customers, you can put on a jacket and make a decent presentation, like things that just make people, make an impression out of people. And the third thing I think is at some stage during the process of selling, you will need to find an internal champion, right? And that's a very important process. An important element of closing a deal, right? So the nature of enterprises is that nobody actually ever really makes a decision. Decisions just happen. And so you have to have somebody who is on your side and is representing your arguments in front of the people that matter. And you should be looking at finding that internal champion. That internal champion will most likely not be the decision maker. If it is, you're very lucky. But it's oftentimes somebody who's sort of a mid to high level person in the organization who has got a technical, professional experience or relevant oversight of a specific part. So if you're selling if you're selling an HR service or product, then the HR director is your internal champion. Or if you're selling a technology solution in production, the production managers, that's the internal champion. But in somebody who is helping you and representing you in those meetings and also is mapping out the path to yes on your behalf, so you understand what's going to have to happen in order for you to get this done. And so that really, those kind of three things I think that I would say are fundamental things you have to overcome: is solving a problem that matters, building your credibility and seeming like a credible partner, and boosting your success just by getting access to insights and internal support through an internal champion. Yeah,
I really like that. And it reminds me of an example with an enterprise customer where, as you say, we had the internal champion. And I want to highlight that I think that's such a good, an important point, particularly because I think it's easy when thinking about enterprise and thinking about this complex decision-making unit that are making the decision. It's easy to then treat the people like they're this enterprisey, corporate-y unit, whereas actually you need to build relationships with the individuals. And I think a nice example for me was demonstrated when I had an enterprise client who their finance and procurement function contacted us to basically say, oh yeah, you got to, supplier registration, got to do this. By the way, our standard terms are like 90 days net, which I think works out as being like 5 months before you get paid between like your invoice and so on, which is a nightmare given that it's already taken a year to get the sale at this point. And I remember a member of my team saying like, so what do like this sucks, like normally we don't do this, like what do I do? And I said speak to like the key person that we've got the relationship with and see what they say. And we didn't even get a reply from that person. Instead, we got then the follow-up email from procurement saying, oh yeah, 30 days is fine.
Yeah. And what a huge difference that makes. from
oh, indeed, like your
from a cash
ability
flow
to scale
standpoint.
between a month and 5 months of getting the money makes a huge difference. So, and I think, as you say, it's everything. Like having that internal champion that goes, yeah, I see the value and pushes it is just perfect. And of course, building that I found in my another business, building that a little bit so that you've got one or two, like 2 or 3 people in the business is then really helpful, because often people leave and the whole the relationship and everything just goes with them.
Yeah, well, that's one of the hidden dangers of enterprise sales is somebody leave, either they're fired or they're reassigned or whatever, and then you kind of start from scratch again. I mean, that's happened a few times before with me and my clients as well.
And so given all of those things that need to happen and those opportunities to get things right or wrong, how important is it for businesses to have like a structured approach, processes in place when approaching large enterprise clients?
I think it's critical. I think it's almost you can't even do it without the structure, right? And I think that's, I think that's one of the real obstacles that a lot of founders need to overcome, right? So entrepreneurs, I would say, again, this is a brash generalization, but generally are more intuitive, right? These are people who kind of want to change the world. They want to do something great. They want to build, great things, hopefully, and they're doing it for the right reasons. And so that doesn't necessarily lend itself to, structure and process and all that stuff. But I have to tell you, if you want to be successful at building a business-to-business focused a company that sells to enterprises, you better get comfortable with structure quickly. There's a certain amount of chaos that you can manage up to a certain point, but in order for you to be able to engage with this type of company, you've got to again be able to master that process, and that's, by the way, really the essence of the third pillar of the launch code, which is like, how do you go about managing your business and your sales processes in an effective way? And number one is set clear goals, right? Like understand what good looks like, both in a long term, a midterm, and a short term basis, and really set out clearly what it is you want to achieve, and see how those enterprise customers and specific types of customers fit into those objectives. That's like step number one. Step number two, you better be able to track your progress and manage your performance effectively by gathering data. I can't tell you how many, I would say early stage businesses actually generating millions and millions of pounds or euros of revenue don't use a CRM system, like a very fundamental basic database of customer contact. And so that's like one of the first, like, do you have a CRM? Oh, no, well, okay, well, like that usually start with that, like just being able to gather information and data in one place and not, relying on slips of paper and Excel. Again, having that, tracking your performance, seeing what's working, see which of your outreach campaigns is delivering the most effective results, doubling down on that, right? So a lot of that stuff is just like thing, so that ultimately use that data to make decisions. And, moving from that, well, my gut tells me that the answer is A, but the data tells me actually, well, the answer is B, and then trusting the data. And the third and final bit, which is very important, is ultimately building the set of functions within the sales and marketing organization that cover off from everything from lead generation to account management, to upselling, to administration and the like, and just making sure that, look, maybe at the beginning it's just 3 people doing 17 jobs, but as you grow the organization, those functions start splitting like an atom, right? And people start getting specific elements of that function. And so creating the pillars of that, so that ultimately as you scale your business, you as a founder don't end up sitting there managing the entire sales process on your own. However, maintaining an important part of sales is as the leader of the organization, but not being burdened with the day-to-day grind. And so that kind of combination of elements is what I think creates the structure that you just described, that will make you much more likely to succeed selling to big customers who expect that from their partners and suppliers.
Fantastic. Love that. And yeah, completely agree. So Zoltan, as we kind of move to a close, what would be the kind of key 1, 2, 3 takeaways that you'd like listeners who are looking to scale their businesses, etc.? What's the key takeaways that you'd like to leave them with?
Well, look, I think broadly speaking, if you're selling to enterprises, I think it's critical that you have a very clear value proposition and message to the market as to why you are the company that a particular type of customer should do business with. It. If you can't explain it yourself, then don't expect others to understand it. The second is, don't fall into the trap of, assuming that a bunch of random actions will somehow coagulate into some, clear outcome. Be very structured in the way that you identify the outbound activities, the partnership activities, and the inbound marketing activities you do, and make sure that you're balancing your activities across those three, and then ultimately, of course, looking at what's delivering results and what's not. And third, again, make sure you're clear on the targets you want to achieve, execute based on the targets so you can ultimately make better decisions and scale your business effectively. To that end, I'd love to connect with any B2B tech founders who find themselves in that position, maybe struggling a little bit with that, but who people want to sell and market to enterprise customers. And I actually want to offer your listeners and viewers an opportunity. The first step I always take when I start working with founders is to share a 5-step process I created to create a crystal clear value proposition, right? This is kind of what I call the low-hanging fruit, where they can experience the immediate results. So I want to share this process with your listeners. So if they go to zoltanvardy.com/podcast, that's ZOLTANVARDY.com/podcast, they can get access to a free value proposition video guide I created. It's a 30-minute video with a worksheet, and they will ultimately be able to use that to create a single sentence that explains why customers should buy what they're selling. And so that's something that hopefully they can use as a resource, and I'd love to offer that to them.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's such a valuable exercise for anyone to do for their businesses, to get that clarity on how to essentially position and pitch their business. So I highly recommend people check that out at zoltanvardy.com/podcast. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Zoltan. It's been great talking to you. I really, really appreciate it. And you've added so much value. So first off, thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
No, brilliant. And I'd like to say, for any we've talked about the principles of enterprise sales work really well for all sorts of businesses. We know that particularly Zoltan focuses on those startup businesses, and I've definitely experienced all this in the world of SaaS startups and trying to build software businesses. But it reminds me that we recently developed some resources. So if you're a SaaS business owner who's looking to systemize your processes, such as enterprise sales, as covered in today's episode, we've now got some guides and resources, including a free scorecard with a report to help you to scale your business faster. And you can check this out at airmanual.co/SaaS. That's SaaS to learn more. But otherwise, one final thing before you go, after you've been listening to this episode, if you found today's content valuable, please take a minute, hit like, subscribe, leave a review, share it on social media, tag us in. We'd really, really appreciate it. It helps the episode get more visibility, helps more people, and also gives a lovely thank you to Zoltan for his time. So please do that. Otherwise, Zoltan, thanks again. Thank you so much for joining me. And to everyone else, until next time, have fun.
Thanks. All right. All set?